1297 AD, 5191 AM. William Wallace, Braveheart, led the Scottish resistance at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. The English army under King Edward I was one that had never been defeated, full of veterans from wars in France and the Holy Land. Edward had 50,000 troops with 1,000 horse cavalry, with contingents from Ireland and Wales. A second English army, over 8,000, joined them. Edward invaded confidently, expecting a weak resistance, but the Scots had hardened from 7 years of English oppression. With an inferior force, the Scots defeated the English and routed their army entirely, butchering them as they fled. Within a month, Wallace rid Scotland of the English, recovering almost all of her castles. In this year, Braveheart became the sole ruler of all Scotland. 1. William Wallace. 1298 AD, 5192 AM. A comet is reported by Europeans, and for the period of 1298 to 1314 AD, Europeans and those in the Far East reported a series of 7 distinct comet or comet-like bodies, plague mists, strange omens in the skies, and earthquake activity. These things also recorded in the Middle East and Africa. In a Genoan prison, the traveller Marco Polo told of his adventures in China to a writer named Rustichello, who then produced the book Description of Marco Polo's Travels, which ignited the imagination of Europe. This book deserves its place in history, for it contributed greatly to the hunger of Europeans to see the rest of the world, initiating the European spirit that followed, known as the colonial expansion. King Edward I of England invaded Scotland again with well over 100,000 troops and a greater cavalry of knights and siege engines. Wallace trained the Scots in long spear warfare and employed a scorched earth policy, nearly starving the English invaders while retreating his own forces. The Scots fought the English at the Battle of Falkirk and lost, but the toll on the English army was so great it could hardly be called a success. The English occupied Scotland, and William Wallace led a small group of guerrilla fighters against the English. This was 414 times 12 years of the Jewish calendar. 1. The Gods of Eden, Bramley. 2. Book of Fabulous Beasts. 3. William Wallace. Note: the greatest crime King Edward I committed against the Scottish was the theft of their history. The Scottish retained 3 large chests full of royal records and ancient documents concerning Scottish Scythian antiquities. Edward confiscated these records, and they have since been lost. 1300 AD, 5194 AM. The approximate date for the disappearance of the Archaix Canyon culture in the United States, a people who left abandoned cliff dwellings and settlements due to sudden drought and sterility in the land. This entire period from 1298 to 1314 AD, and even later, was one of global climate change and astronomical activity seen and experienced on Earth. 1. Great disasters. 1301 AD, 5194 AM. A comet appeared that, according to Europeans, was spectacular to behold. 1. Ancient Mysteries. 1303 AD, 5197 AM. A violent earthquake in northern Egypt toppled the remains of the Pharos lighthouse. 1. Alexandria. 1305 AD, 5199 AM. William Wallace, or Braveheart, was captured and paraded naked through London and sentenced to die 3 times by a court picked and allied to King Edward I of England. A crowd of English and visitors watched as Wallace was hanged until almost dead and revived. Then he was castrated, having his genitals cut off. Thirdly, he was eviscerated, and while still alive, he had all of his intestines and organs removed. In the words of historian James Mackey, King Edward, quote, committed the supreme folly of giving the Scots a martyr, and that made them a nation more securely than a decade of oppression, unquote. 1. William Wallace. 1306 AD, 5200 AM. The Jews are expelled from France. Robert the Bruce is made King of Scotland at Scone. Dante Alighieri began composing his epic work Divine Comedy. Concerning a pilgrimage to hell, he would continue writing it until his death in 1321. 1. Synagogue of Satan. Jewish supremacism. 2. William Wallace. 1307 AD, 5201 AM. On October the 13th, a Friday, by papal order with the aid of King Philippe, who both sought the immense wealth of the Templars, all the Knights of the Templar order that could be found were rounded up and imprisoned. This gave rise to the popular depiction of Friday the 13th as being an evil day. Church officials and secular government tortured the knights to get them to reveal their secrets. But the Roman Church nor the European regents involved in the conspiracy had known just how organised the Templars were. Though estates and castles were confiscated and herds apprehended, the Knights Templar escaped with their great wealth. The escaping knights had one of the greatest navies around, and their fleets were made up of knights and crews from Portugal, Spain, France and Scotland, and they began patrolling the seas, hunting Vatican ships and all vessels linked to Roman Catholicism. This new menace on the high seas flew the dreaded Jolly Roger, the black flag with skull and crossbones so popular in today's depictions of pirates. The flag was named after the man Roger II of Sicily, 1095 to 1154 AD, a close Templar associate during the Crusades. The new pirate fleet cost the Roman Catholic Empire more money than they had ever confiscated from the Templars. A curious fact is mentioned by author David Hatchett Childress in that within a generation after the dispersal of the Knights Templar, the ports of Europe were filled with maps of all the coasts of the world, porterlands and navigation secrets that had been priorly guarded. 1. Pirates and the Lost Templar Fleet.